I was on the back porch of our home just outside San Diego, nursing a cold beer as the sun dipped below the horizon. The soft evening breeze made the curtains flutter inside the open windows. Emily, my wife of 10 years, stood in the hallway adjusting her beige blouse and tailored trousers. She looked sharp, professional, and perfectly composed, the image of someone heading to an important meeting. She told me she had a late client dinner downtown, and since she had an early presentation the next morning, she might stay at a nearby hotel. Her explanation was reasonable enough, but when I offered to drive her, she politely declined with that familiar, easy smile. I didn't push it. After a decade of marriage, you learn when to let things go. Yet, as she walked out the door, something about her tone stuck with me. There was a subtle edge to it, almost imperceptible but enough to linger in the back of my mind. Later that night, as I washed dishes, my phone buzzed with a message from Emily. She'd sent a photo of an elegantly set table with pasta, a glass of wine, and a neatly folded napkin embossed with a restaurant logo I recognized immediately, Bellevue. That place was barely 10 minutes from our home. The picture didn't match her story about needing a hotel downtown. Why stay overnight so close to home? It didn't add up. Trying to rationalize it, I told myself maybe the meeting would run exceptionally late, or maybe she wanted to avoid the commute before her presentation. But no matter how I spun it, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. As I went to the garage to grab my phone charger that night, I noticed something odd, a black silk scarf lying near the entrance. It wasn't Emily's. She'd never wear anything like it. The faint scent of expensive perfume clung to it, but it carried an underlying musk I couldn't ignore. My gut twisted, but I forced myself to dismiss it. It could have been left by a colleague or someone she gave a ride to. People misplace things all the time, right? The next morning, Emily walked into the kitchen, looking remarkably refreshed and polished for someone who supposedly stayed at a hotel after a late client dinner. Her outfit and demeanor were flawless. I held up the scarf and asked her if it was hers. For a split second, she hesitated, barely long enough to catch, but then she smiled, smooth as ever. "Oh, that's Lauren's," she said. "I gave her a ride yesterday, and she must have left it in the car." It was a convincing response. Too convincing. Lauren didn't strike me as the type to own something so elegant, but I nodded and let it go. Still, my mind was spinning. Emily was meticulous, a master at covering her tracks. But I wasn't convinced. The scarf, the restaurant photo, her overly calm demeanor, it all felt like breadcrumbs leading to something I wasn't prepared to face. That afternoon, I found myself unable to focus on anything else. The scarf, the restaurant, her story, it all gnawed at me. So, I decided to drive to Bellevue. The upscale restaurant was quiet, the kind of place where big deals were brokered, or where discreet liaisons might unfold. I ordered a coffee and took a seat in the corner, scanning the room for any clues. When the waitress approached, I showed her a photo of Emily. Her response hit me like a gut punch. "Oh, yes, I remember her," she said. "She was here last night, but not with a group. She was with a man, older, well-dressed, in a dark suit. They sat by the window." My heart sank, but I kept my composure, thanked her, and left a tip. Outside, the afternoon sun felt harsher than usual. My thoughts raced as I tried to piece everything together. Emily had been deliberate, careful, and precise. If she was hiding something, it wasn't sloppy. But even the smartest people slip up eventually. And right now, I had just enough cracks in her story to start seeing the truth. That evening, when Emily came home, she greeted me with her usual charm, kissed me on the cheek, and asked how my day had been. I studied her carefully, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, the way she avoided holding eye contact for too long. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. A direct confrontation wouldn't give me answers, not with Emily. She was sharp, a pro at spinning narratives. I'd seen her in action at work events, closing deals and diffusing conflicts like a seasoned diplomat. If she was lying, she'd be prepared. Instead, I decided to play the role of the oblivious husband. I couldn't let her know I was starting to connect the dots. That night, I sat on the porch with another beer, staring into the dimming sky. The distant hum of traffic filled the silence, but my mind was anything but quiet. I knew one thing for certain: if I wanted answers, I had to be strategic. No sudden moves. No tipping my hand. A couple of days later, Emily mentioned another late meeting downtown. As she got ready, I approached her casually, my phone in hand. "Hey, my location services app is acting up. Can you take a look? Yours always works fine." She took my phone without hesitation, her movements calm and confident. But as she adjusted the settings, I noticed something, a quick, almost imperceptible glance at her own phone. She was double-checking something. It was subtle, but it was there. After she left, I activated the tracking app we'd installed on each other's phones months ago, something we'd agreed to do just in case of emergencies. Her location showed up downtown, exactly where she said she'd be. Was I overthinking all of this? Was I letting suspicion cloud my judgment? Still, that nagging feeling in my gut refused to go away. Over the next few days, I stayed quiet, observing her carefully. On the surface, she was the same Emily, affectionate, chatty, and polished. But once you notice a crack in the facade, it's impossible to unsee it. She seemed a little too cheerful, a little too rehearsed. Something was off. A week later, she announced she'd be going on a girls' night out in another city. As she packed her overnight bag, she hummed to herself, looking almost giddy about the trip. She kissed me goodbye and climbed into a taxi, and I watched from the window as the car disappeared down the street. The moment she was out of sight, I got to work. I started calling her friends and colleagues, casually inviting them over for a last-minute barbecue. "Bring whoever you want," I said, keeping my tone light. Within an hour, the backyard was buzzing with conversation, laughter, and the smell of grilled meat. Lauren, David, Michelle, her usual work crowd, had all shown up. As we sipped beers and flipped burgers, I steered the conversation toward work. "Hey, you guys remember that client meeting Emily had at Bellevue? She said it was with some big client, a sharp-dressed older guy. Sound familiar?" Lauren froze mid-sip, her beer hovering just below her lips. "Bellevue," she said, frowning. "I don't think we've ever had meetings there. Most of our client meetings are either in the office or on Zoom these days." David chimed in. "Yeah, and if it was someone that important, the whole team would have been there. Emily doesn't usually handle high-profile clients alone." Michelle nodded in agreement. "Yeah, those big meetings are always team efforts. Definitely not one-on-one dinners." I nodded casually, acting like their responses were exactly what I'd expected. But inside, my mind was spinning. Their words confirmed what I already suspected. Emily had lied. Not just about Bellevue, but about the nature of her so-called meetings. As the barbecue wound down and everyone began to leave, I stood in the quiet of the backyard, staring at the embers of the dying grill. The scarf, the restaurant, the man in the suit, these weren't isolated events. They were pieces of a larger puzzle. And I was determined to see the full picture. The next evening, Emily came home from her girls' night out, looking relaxed and content. She greeted me with the same breezy smile, but I was no longer buying into her facade. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to form a picture I didn't like, and I knew I needed help to get to the bottom of this. That's when I remembered Ray Harris. Ray wasn't just an old friend, he was a former CIA operative turned private investigator. Years ago, he'd helped me through some tough times during my first marriage, and I knew he could be trusted to dig where I couldn't. After pacing the living room for what felt like an hour, I finally dialed his number. "Mike," he said in his usual gruff tone. "Been a while. What's going on?" I didn't waste time. "Ray, I need your help again. It's about Emily. Something's not adding up." An hour later, I met Ray at his downtown office. The place was exactly as I remembered it, dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of cigars and leather. Photos from his old operations lined the walls, a testament to his sharp, methodical mind. He listened intently as I laid out everything: the restaurant, the scarf, the strange behavior, the colleagues' reactions. When I was done, Ray leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes narrowing. "You're not crazy, Mike. This doesn't add up. I'll start tonight." Ray wasted no time. The first thing he did was tail Emily during one of her late-night meetings. From his inconspicuous old Ford Crown Victoria, he watched her leave the office and change into a cocktail dress in the car, a red flag right there. She then drove to Bellevue, where she met the same older man in the tailored suit. Ray managed to get a table nearby, blending into the background with a glass of whiskey in hand. But here's the twist. There wasn't any flirtation between Emily and the man. Their body language was stiff, their conversation quiet and businesslike. Ray snapped a few discreet photos and called me the next day to share what he'd found. "Doesn't seem romantic," he said. "But people don't sneak around and change clothes in their cars for regular client meetings. Something isn't right." Determined to uncover more, Ray took things a step further. Using his old tricks, he posed as a delivery driver and planted a listening device near Emily's office workstation. For days, he monitored her conversations. Most of what he heard was professional and mundane, until day 3, when something caught his attention. Emily was on the phone, her voice low but steady. "I need to meet with Josh. He's not part of the company, but we need to finalize the details." Ray flagged the name immediately. Whoever Josh was, he was outside her work circle and worth following up on. A few nights later, Ray tailed her again, this time to an empty parking lot behind a strip mall. The man she met there wasn't the older gentleman from Bellevue. This guy was younger, dressed casually in jeans and a leather jacket, exuding an edgy confidence. Their conversation grew heated, but Ray couldn't make out most of the words. He managed to snap a few photos before Emily got back in her car and drove off. When he sent me the pictures later that night, my stomach dropped. I recognized the guy instantly. It was Alex. Alex wasn't just some random stranger. He'd been a close friend of ours for years. We'd gone camping together, celebrated holidays, and shared countless weekends grilling in the backyard. He was the last person I would have suspected. When Ray called me to discuss the photos, his voice was calm, but his words were unsettling. "Mike, if Alex is involved, this changes everything. He's not just a random player in this. Whatever's going on, he knows more than he's letting on." I stared at the photo of Alex on my phone, my mind spinning. How could someone I trusted so deeply be tangled up in this? The situation had officially gone off the rails. This wasn't just about Emily sneaking around. It was something far bigger than I'd anticipated. Ray had a plan, and I had no choice but to follow his lead. "No sudden moves," he warned. "If we're going to figure this out, we need to play it smart." For the first time in weeks, I felt genuinely shaken. Whatever game Emily and Alex were playing, it was far more dangerous than I'd realized. Ray didn't waste a moment after identifying Alex as a key player in all of this. His plan was simple: use Alex's connection to get closer to the truth. According to Ray, Alex wasn't just a bystander. He was actively involved, likely hiding something significant. I had to tread carefully, but I also knew this was my best shot at answers. Ray had me send Alex a vague text message designed to stir curiosity and unease. "Hey, Alex. I've got a problem. Can we meet? Emily doesn't know." It was deliberate, calculated. Within minutes, Alex replied, suggesting a meeting at a quiet cafe downtown. Ray and I parked across the street in his old Crown Victoria, watching as Alex arrived, his usual confident demeanor replaced by a jittery unease. He ordered a coffee, fidgeted with his phone, and constantly glanced around the room like he was expecting trouble. After a few minutes, he sent a message and left abruptly. Ray, ever the professional, had already logged the number Alex texted. "He's reporting to someone," Ray muttered as we watched him disappear down the street. "This isn't just nerves, he's scared." The next step was bolder. Ray handed me a thick folder filled with fabricated bank statements, fake transaction logs, and other incriminating documents. It was convincing, designed to look like evidence of Emily's involvement in something shady. "You're going to show this to Alex," Ray instructed. "Tell him you found it in Emily's things. Watch his reaction." The plan went into motion a few nights later at a dimly lit pub on the edge of town. I kept things casual at first, ordering beers and making small talk. When the moment felt right, I slid the folder across the table. "I found this in Emily's stuff," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "I need your help figuring it out." Alex's face went pale as he flipped through the pages. His hands trembled slightly, and his eyes darted around the room as if he were searching for an escape. Finally he spoke, his voice low and tense. "Mike, you don't get it. You shouldn't be digging into this. If this gets into the wrong hands, it's going to cause a mess." I stayed calm, nodding like I accepted his explanation. Alex shoved the folder into his bag, threw some cash on the table, and left without finishing his drink. Ray, waiting outside, tailed him from a distance. Alex led us to a nondescript building on the outskirts of town. It looked abandoned, except for a flickering light above the doorway. Ray watched as Alex handed the folder to a hooded figure who quickly disappeared into the shadows. "Whoever's on the other side of this," Ray said over the phone, "is careful. They're not amateurs. And Alex, he's not helping out of loyalty, he's scared." Things escalated quickly after that. Ray intercepted information about a planned meeting between Alex and Emily at a public park downtown. It struck us both as an unusual choice. They weren't the type to meet somewhere so open. But it was an opportunity we couldn't pass up. Ray set up a hidden camera in advance while I waited in the car with binoculars. Emily arrived first, her posture stiff and her eyes darting around nervously. Alex showed up minutes later, his usual leather jacket in place and his expression tense. Their conversation started quiet but quickly grew heated. Even from a distance, I could see Alex gesturing wildly, his face tight with frustration. Then I heard him raise his voice. "If Mike finds out the truth, it's over. He'll never forgive you, and it'll blow back on all of us." My grip on the binoculars tightened. Whatever they were tangled up in, it wasn't a simple affair or a casual mistake. This was deeper, messier, and far more dangerous than I'd imagined. I felt a surge of anger, but Ray's voice crackled through the earpiece. "Stay put, Mike. If you confront them now, we lose our only lead." Emily stormed off, leaving Alex standing alone in the park. He sat down on a bench, his head in his hands, before pulling out his phone and typing furiously. "He knows we're watching him," Ray muttered. "He feels it." Every instinct in me screamed to confront Alex right then and there, but I held back. Ray was right. If I blew this now, I might never get to the bottom of what was happening. But one thing was certain, whatever Emily and Alex were up to, it was unraveling. And I wasn't going to sit idly by anymore. Ray laid out the next steps with the precision of someone who'd spent years navigating high-stakes situations. His plan was to draw Alex deeper into the open, using his growing paranoia against him. But this time, I wasn't just a passive observer. I was ready to step into the game myself. The first move was subtle but effective. I sent Alex a casual text in our group chat. "Emily's out of town this weekend. Let's get together like old times. Beer, laughs, the works." The message felt natural, unforced. Alex responded within hours. "Sounds good. I'm in." The weekend arrived, and as Emily packed her bags for her supposed work trip, I kissed her goodbye at the door, watching her drive away. Once she was gone, Jack and Kyle, two old friends I trusted implicitly, showed up at the house. Jack, a former Navy man with a calm and calculating demeanor, stationed himself near the entrance. Kyle, impulsive and fiery, stayed in the kitchen, gripping a wrench just in case things got out of hand. Alex arrived just after sunset, carrying a bottle of whiskey and flashing his usual confident smile. But the moment he stepped inside and saw the tension in the room, his smile faltered. Jack locked the door behind him, and I stepped forward, holding a baseball bat. "Sit down, Alex," I said evenly. He hesitated, his eyes darting between Jack, Kyle, and me, but he eventually sank into the couch. The bottle of whiskey sat untouched on the coffee table. I wasted no time. "Tell me what you know about Emily." "No." At first, he tried to wriggle his way out of it, offering vague excuses and half-truths. But I wasn't in the mood for games. I slammed the bat against the coffee table, splintering the wood. Alex jumped, his face pale and sweaty. Okay, he stammered. "I'll tell you everything." His voice cracked as he unraveled the story. Emily wasn't just sneaking around. She was involved in something far more sinister. According to Alex, she was selling sensitive information to outside parties. That alone would have been bad enough, but then he dropped the real bombshell. She's keeping files, Mike. Photos. Videos. Private stuff no one should ever see, he said, his voice trembling. "She's keeping it all somewhere in your house. In the attic, I think." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. My grip on the bat tightened until my knuckles turned white. Alex's words painted a picture of a betrayal far worse than I could have imagined. But I forced myself to stay calm, my voice low and controlled. "If you tell her about this conversation, Alex, if you even hint at it, I will find you." Do you understand? He nodded frantically, practically tripping over himself to agree. Moments later, he bolted out the door, leaving the whiskey behind. Jack and Kyle stayed quiet as the tension in the room hung thick. They offered to stay, but I waved them off. This was something I needed to face alone. Once the house was silent, I grabbed a flashlight and headed to the attic. The air was thick with dust, and the weak beam of the flashlight barely cut through the darkness. My heart pounded as I moved methodically through old boxes of holiday decorations and forgotten keepsakes. And then I saw it, a worn suede backpack tucked behind a pile of stuffed animals. It was heavier than it looked. My hands trembled as I unzipped it. Inside was a leather-bound diary, its cover worn and scratched. The first page bore Emily's handwriting, neat and precise. My rules. My clients. My desires. I flipped through the pages, my stomach twisting with every word. Detailed entries chronicled her secret activities, explicit photos, videos, and other content she'd been selling to clients. There were schedules, lists, and even notes about her interactions. My name appeared at the bottom of one list, a cruel afterthought in her twisted double life. I couldn't bring myself to read more. The diary fell from my hands onto the wooden floorboards, and for a moment I just stood there, my chest tight, my breath shallow. The reality of it all felt like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. Finally, I forced myself to collect the diary and the rest of the documents in the bag. Whatever this was, it couldn't stay here. I stumbled down the attic stairs, my vision tunneling, and slammed the hatch shut behind me. With the bag in hand, I left the house and drove straight to my lawyer's office. When I arrived, he was waiting for me, his sharp, no-nonsense demeanor as steady as ever. I dropped the bag onto his desk and sat down, my jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. He opened the diary and skimmed through the photos and documents, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked up, his voice calm but firm. "Mike, this isn't just grounds for divorce. This is criminal. There's espionage, exploitation, and potentially blackmail involved. This could get very messy." I didn't hesitate. "Do whatever it takes," I said. "I don't care how long it takes or how much it costs. I want her out of my life." He nodded, his tone measured. "Prepare yourself. This won't be quick or clean. But I'll make sure you come out on top." The legal battle that followed wasn't just a divorce, it was a war. Emily didn't go down quietly, but I wasn't walking into this unarmed. My lawyer was a seasoned professional, someone who thrived in the courtroom. Together, we built a case so strong it was almost airtight. The documents, the photos, the diary, all of it became ammunition. The first blow came when my lawyer presented evidence of Emily's financial deception. She'd been funneling money out of our joint accounts for years, transferring it to shell accounts and private individuals with no legitimate ties to our marriage. One transfer stood out in particular, a significant sum sent directly to her attorney before the divorce proceedings had even started. The courtroom fell silent as my lawyer laid it all out, piece by piece, until even the judge reprimanded her legal team for their questionable ethics. But the real turning point came when we brought in the diary and the media files. My lawyer presented it all without sensationalizing, just the cold, hard facts of what Emily had been doing. The entries painted a clear picture of her secret double life, selling explicit content, engaging in transactional relationships, and using our home and marriage as a cover. Her lawyer tried to argue that this was a violation of her privacy, but my attorney had anticipated that move. "These materials were hidden in a shared space," he argued firmly. "A space legally accessible to both parties. There is no violation of privacy here." The defense crumbled under the weight of the evidence. To make matters worse for Emily, one of her former clients was subpoenaed to testify. Under oath, he admitted to paying her for explicit content and confirmed that their interactions were strictly transactional. It wasn't just damning, it was devastating. As the courtroom drama unfolded, Emily's composure began to crack. Her lawyer floundered, trying to redirect the narrative, but there was nowhere to hide. The final nail in the coffin came when a private auditor, hired by my legal team, uncovered a tangled web of fraudulent contracts, offshore accounts, and money siphoned from our marital assets. Every transaction was documented and traced back to her. One of her colleagues, who had unknowingly signed off on a fraudulent contract, testified under subpoena. His statement painted Emily as manipulative and deceptive, further sealing her fate. Emily's team tried to pivot, painting her as a victim of emotional abuse and control. They even produced photos of bruises, claiming they were proof of my supposed violent tendencies. For a moment, the courtroom turned its gaze on me, weighing the possibility. But my lawyer remained unshaken. Medical records proved the bruises predated our marriage. And when we presented text messages where Emily bragged to friends about using similar photos to manipulate past partners, the facade crumbled entirely. In a final desperate move, Emily's lawyer accused me of being vindictive, claiming I was dragging her through this to ruin her reputation. But then, a surprise witness, a former lover of Emily's I'd never even heard of, stepped forward. He testified that she'd used the same tactics with him, spinning elaborate lies and weaponizing sympathy to cover her tracks. It was over. The judge's final ruling was swift and unforgiving. The behavior exhibited by Mrs. Stewart is not only morally reprehensible but criminal in nature. This court cannot, in good conscience, allow her to benefit from her actions. The decision stripped Emily of almost everything. The house, the savings, and even the car were awarded to me. She was ordered to pay fines for financial fraud and cover my legal fees. It was a complete and total victory, but it didn't feel like one. Sitting in that courtroom, watching her slump in her chair, pale and hollow, all I felt was exhaustion. As I left the courthouse, my lawyer shook my hand. "You won, Mike," he said. "And you won decisively." Outside, the crisp afternoon air hit me like a bomb, but the weight on my shoulders hadn't lifted. The betrayal, the lies, and the humiliation would take time to process. But as I stood on those courthouse steps, I realized one thing. For the first time in years, I was free. Emily had played her hand and lost. And while the road ahead was still unclear, it was finally mine to walk. The house was mine again, my finances were intact, and my life, fractured though it was my own. That night, as I stood in the quiet of my living room, the last remnants of her things packed away, I made myself a promise. Never again would I let someone else control my narrative. This chapter was over, and I was ready to start writing the next one. Thank you for visited my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube.